Hey guys, tonight we begin with something claustrophobic, something hot, something loud enough to shatter your eardrums and dark enough to swallow your sanity whole. We're talking about what life was really like inside a tank during battle. Not the sanitized version you see in movies, where heroic crews coordinate perfectly and emerge victorious with maybe a smudge of dirt on their faces. No, we're talking about the real thing, the metal coffin that cooked you alive. The steel box where the temperature could hit 150 degrees Fahrenheit. The cramped nightmare where you couldn't stand up, couldn't stretch out, and definitely couldn't escape when things went wrong. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep, seeking comfort in the discomfort of history. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. Get yourself settled in, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just been assigned to a Sherman tank crew. It's 1944, somewhere in France, and you're about to learn what it really means to fight a war from inside a 30-ton metal box. The good news? You've got armor plating between you and the enemy. The bad news? That armor turns your tank into an oven in summer, a freezer in winter, and a tomb when things go sideways. Welcome to the most terrifying workplace in human history. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Your new home. You're standing outside your tank for the first time, and honestly, it looks smaller than you imagined. The M4 Sherman stands about 9 feet tall, 18 feet long, and 9 feet wide. You've seen pictures. You've done the training. But nothing prepared you for how small it actually is when you realize you're going to spend the next several weeks living inside it. Your crew consists of 5 men. There's the commander, who sits in the turret and supposedly knows what he's doing. The gunner right below him, responsible for actually hitting things. The loader, whose job is exactly what it sounds like and will leave him exhausted and bruised. The driver, squeezed into the front left position. And the assistant driver/bow gunner, crammed into the front right. That's you, by the way. Congratulations on your new office. The hatch is small, really small. You have to twist yourself like a contortionist just to drop through it. Your boots hit the metal floor with a clang that echoes in the confined space. The smell hits you immediately. It's a mixture of oil, gasoline, cordite from previous battles, old sweat, and something metallic you can't quite place. This is the smell that will define your life for the foreseeable future. It'll get into your hair, your skin, your clothes. Months after you leave this tank, assuming you do leave it, you'll still smell traces of it. Look around your new home. To your left is the driver, separated from you by the transmission housing. That massive hump of metal and gears takes up a huge chunk of the interior space. Above you and behind you is the turret basket, where the commander, gunner, and loader live. The interior is painted white, supposedly to help with visibility, but it's already stained with oil, dirt, and God knows what else. Your position, the bow gunner spot, gives you a machine gun and a periscope. The machine gun is a .30 caliber Browning, and it's going to be your best friend and worst enemy. The periscope gives you a limited view of the outside world. And when I say limited, I mean you can see maybe 30 degrees of arc in front of you. Everything else? Blind spot. You're essentially looking at the world through a mail slot. The floor beneath your feet is metal. Cold metal in winter, hot metal in summer, and always hard as hell. There's no padding, no cushioning, nothing soft anywhere in this machine. Every surface is unforgiving steel or iron. You'll learn this the hard way when the tank hits a bump and you smash your head, knee, elbow, or any other body part against something sharp. Storage is a joke. You've got ammunition racks everywhere, filled with shells that could kill you if they cook off. You've got personal gear crammed into every available nook and cranny. Your sleeping bag, when you're lucky enough to sleep, goes wherever you can fit it. Food, water, medical supplies, all of it competing for space with the mechanical guts of this beast. There's no bathroom. Let's be clear about that right now. When nature calls, and it will call, you've got 2 options. Hold it or use an empty shell casing. Yes, you read that right. Crews would piss into spent shell casings and then toss them out the hatch when possible. If you need to do anything more substantial, you better pray for a lull in the fighting long enough to climb out and find a ditch. Spoiler alert, those lulls are rare. The lighting is terrible. There are a few small bulbs powered by the tank's electrical system, but they're dim and create more shadows than illumination. During the day, sunlight filters through the periscopes and vision slits, giving you just enough light to see what you're doing. At night, you're working in near darkness, relying on touch and memory to find what you need. Your seat, if you can call it that, is a metal bench with maybe a thin cushion if you're lucky. Most of that cushion has been compressed flat by previous occupants. You'll be sitting on this thing for hours at a time, and your back, your legs, and your rear end will all hate you for it. There's no lumbar support, no adjustable height, no ergonomic design whatsoever. It's a metal box to park your body on while you do your job. And here's the thing nobody tells you about tanks. They're loud even when they're not moving. The engine idles with a constant rumble that vibrates through every surface. Radios crackle with static and voices. Metal creaks and groans as the tank settles. It's never quiet, never peaceful. Even when you're stationary, even when you're supposedly resting, the noise is constant. Welcome to your new home. This is where you'll eat, sleep, work, and quite possibly die. Get comfortable, or don't. Comfort isn't really an option here. Chapter 2. The heat. Let's talk about the temperature because this might actually be the worst part of tank life, and that's saying something. The Sherman tank is powered by a radial aircraft engine. The same kind of engine you'd find in a bomber repurposed for ground warfare. This engine sits right behind the crew compartment, separated by a thin firewall. When this engine is running, and it's almost always running, it generates enough heat to warm a small house. Except you're not in a small house. You're in a metal box. In summer, particularly in North Africa, Italy, or France during July and August, the interior temperature of a Sherman could easily reach 120 to 150 degrees Fahrenheit. Some crews reported even higher temperatures. Imagine being locked in a car on the hottest day of summer with the windows up and the heater blasting. Now do that while wearing wool uniforms and a heavy helmet. Now add the stress of being shot at. The heat is suffocating. It's oppressive. It's inescapable. You'll sweat through your uniform in minutes. The sweat will soak your undershirt, your pants, your socks, everything. And then you'll keep sweating because there's nowhere for the heat to go. The metal walls conduct heat from the engine and from the sun beating down on the exterior. You're essentially being slow-cooked. Dehydration becomes a serious problem. Each crew member is supposed to have a canteen of water, but that water is warm within minutes and tastes like metal and chemicals. You're supposed to ration it because resupply isn't always possible during combat. But you're sweating so much that rationing becomes a cruel joke. You drink more than you should because your body is screaming for hydration, and then you run out and then you're in real trouble. The heat affects everything. Your ability to think clearly diminishes. Your reaction times slow down. You become irritable and short-tempered with your crew members. Simple tasks become monumentally difficult because your hands are slippery with sweat and your vision is blurred by perspiration dripping into your eyes. The gunner has it particularly bad. He's got his face pressed against rubber eyepieces on the gun sight, and that rubber is hot and sticky. His hands are on metal controls that have been heated by the sun and the engine. He's trying to acquire targets and calculate range and elevation while essentially sitting in a sauna. The loader is probably suffering the most. His job requires constant physical exertion. He's grabbing shells that weigh anywhere from 25 to 40 pounds depending on the type. He's lifting them from the ready rack, loading them into the breech, then reaching for the next one. Over and over, in 140-degree heat. Some loaders would pass out from heat exhaustion during extended engagements. Want air conditioning? Dream on. There's no such thing. The only ventilation comes from opening the hatches, which you absolutely cannot do during combat because, bullets and shrapnel. Some tanks had small fans installed by ingenious crews, but these were personal modifications, not standard equipment. And a small battery-powered fan in a metal furnace doesn't accomplish much beyond moving hot air around. The heat also creates other problems you might not think about. Food spoils quickly. Any rations you've stored in the tank will turn rancid in days. Chocolate melts into brown puddles. Bread grows moldy. Canned goods are fine until you open them, and then they start degrading immediately. Your skin suffers too. Heat rash develops in all the places where fabric rubs against sweaty skin. Your groin, your armpits, under your collar, anywhere moisture gets trapped. These rashes itch and burn, and there's no relief because you can't exactly strip down and air out in a tank. Some crews developed serious skin infections that required medical attention. And at night, you might think it cools down, right? Wrong. The metal holds heat like a battery. The engine has been running all day, heating up the entire structure. Even after sunset, even after you've shut down for the night, the interior remains hot for hours. You'll try to sleep in this heat, soaked in your own sweat, breathing air that feels thick and heavy in your lungs. In winter, the problem reverses but doesn't improve. Now you're freezing. The metal sucks away your body heat. The engine warmth that was unbearable in summer is now inadequate in winter. You'll huddle near the firewall, trying to absorb whatever warmth you can, but your feet and hands will still go numb. Frostbite becomes a real concern. Some crews tried to start small fires inside the tank for warmth, which was incredibly dangerous given all the fuel and ammunition. There's no temperature regulation, no thermostat, no climate control. You're at the mercy of whatever conditions exist outside, amplified and made worse by the metal box you're trapped in. So when people talk about tank warfare, they focus on the armor and the guns and the tactics. But ask any tanker what they remember most, and a lot of them will tell you about the heat. The relentless, crushing, inescapable heat that never let up and never gave mercy. Chapter 3. The noise. Think the heat is bad? Let's talk about what this machine does to your hearing. The engine is loud. Not movie loud, where you hear a rumble in the background. Actually loud. Ear-splitting, thought-disrupting, conversation-ending loud. The radial engine produces around 400 horsepower, and every single one of those horses is screaming right behind your head. At idle, the engine produces noise levels around 90 to 100 decibels. That's equivalent to standing next to a lawnmower or a jackhammer. And that's when you're sitting still. When the tank is moving, when the engine is working hard, the noise jumps to 110, 120 decibels or more. That's the level where permanent hearing damage occurs with even brief exposure. There's no hearing protection. Earplugs existed? Sure, but they weren't standard issue, and most crews didn't use them anyway because you needed to hear radio communications and orders from your commander. So you just accepted that your ears were going to ring, your head was going to pound, and your hearing was going to deteriorate. The engine noise isn't even the worst part. That's just the constant background roar you learn to tune out after a while, like living next to a highway. The real problem is everything else. When the gun fires, the noise is catastrophic. The main gun on a Sherman is a 75mm cannon, and when it goes off, the sound is beyond loud. It's a physical force. The blast wave hits you like a punch. Your whole body vibrates. Your vision blurs. Your teeth rattle in your skull. The noise is so intense it triggers your body's panic response. Your heart races. Adrenaline dumps into your system. And this happens over and over during an engagement. The gunner and loader are closest to the gun when it fires, but everyone in the tank feels it. The concussive force rattles through the metal hull. Dust shakes loose from every crevice. Anything not secured goes flying. And your ears? Your ears just gave up trying to process what they're experiencing. After a battle, your ears will ring for hours, sometimes days. Some tankers developed permanent tinnitus, a constant ringing that never stopped for the rest of their lives. Others lost significant portions of their hearing range. Many went partially deaf by the end of the war. But it's not just the gun. It's everything. The tracks clanking over the ground. The transmission grinding through gears. The suspension squeaking and groaning over rough terrain. Metal scraping against metal constantly. The radio crackling with static and voices shouting over the noise. When you're hit, the noise reaches a whole new level. An enemy shell striking your armor creates a sound unlike anything else. It's a massive clang that reverberates through the entire structure. The metal rings like a bell. The force of the impact shakes everything. Loose equipment goes flying. Men get thrown against walls. And the noise just keeps echoing, bouncing around the interior, amplified by the confined space. If the shell penetrates, which it often does against German guns, the noise becomes apocalyptic. Metal tears. The shell screams through the interior. It ricochets off surfaces, fragmenting and creating more projectiles. Men scream. The engine might catch fire with a roar. Ammunition might cook off with rapid explosions. This chaos in audio form. Even without combat, the noise is relentless. You're trying to sleep, but the engine is idling 20 feet from your head. You're trying to eat, but you can't hear yourself chew. You're trying to coordinate with your crew, but everyone is shouting to be heard over the mechanical cacophony. Communication becomes a nightmare. The tank has an intercom system, little throat microphones and earphones, but these are primitive by modern standards. They crackle and cut out. Background noise overwhelms them. You end up shouting into them anyway. Orders get misheard. Critical information gets lost. People make mistakes because they simply didn't hear what they were supposed to do. The commander, sitting up in the turret, has to communicate with his crew, with other tanks in the platoon, and with supporting infantry. He's got multiple radio frequencies to monitor, orders to give, and tactical decisions to make, all while the world around him is one continuous assault on his senses. Some commanders went hoarse from yelling. Others developed stress-related voice problems. And here's something you might not consider. The noise affects your ability to think. When you're in a constant state of sensory overload, your brain struggles to process information. Decision-making becomes harder. You miss details. You make errors in judgment. The noise isn't just uncomfortable. It's actively working against your ability to do your job and survive. After a long day in the tank, when you finally get to climb out for a few hours of rest, the silence is jarring. Your ears are still ringing. Everything sounds muffled and distant. You feel disoriented, like you're underwater. It takes time for your hearing to recover even slightly, and then you have to get back in the tank and do it all over again. Veterans of tank warfare almost universally mention the noise. It's one of those details that doesn't make it into history books or movies, but it was a defining feature of the experience. The constant, overwhelming, damaging noise that never stopped and never got easier to handle. Chapter 4. The smell. You thought the heat and noise were bad? Let's talk about what your nose has to endure in this metal nightmare. The smell inside a tank is complex. It's layered. It evolves throughout the day and gets worse as the days turn into weeks. If you tried to create this smell artificially, you'd need a chemistry set and a strong stomach. Let's start with the baseline: engine oil and gasoline. These are constant. The engine leaks. They all leak. Oil drips and splatters. Coats surfaces. It gets on your clothes, your hands, your face. The smell is acrid and chemical, hanging in the air like an invisible cloud. Gasoline fumes seep into the crew compartment. Not enough to make you pass out, usually, but enough to give you a persistent headache and a vaguely nauseous feeling. Add to that the smell of hot metal. When metal gets heated to extreme temperatures, it develops its own scent. It's sharp, almost electric, like you're breathing in molecules of iron. This smell intensifies after combat when the gun has been firing and the armor has been hit. Now let's talk about cordite. When the main gun fires, it produces smoke and fumes from the propellant charge. This cordite smoke is toxic and smells like a mixture of sulfur, burnt hair, and chemical waste. It's supposed to be vented out of the tank through a system of fans and extractors, but these systems are primitive and often don't work properly. The smoke lingers in the crew compartment. It burns your eyes. It irritates your throat. It makes you cough. And the smell embeds itself in everything. The crew itself contributes significantly to the olfactory nightmare. 5 men living in close quarters, sweating profusely, with no opportunity to bathe. Body odor becomes a fact of life. You stop noticing your own smell after a while, but the collective funk of 5 unwashed bodies in a confined space? That never stops being noticeable. It's sour and thick and completely inescapable. Remember that bathroom situation we discussed? Yeah, that adds its own special notes to the bouquet. Urine in shell casings, sometimes spilled, always present. The smell of ammonia and waste mixing with all the other scents. If someone has to defecate during combat and can't get out, well, things get even worse. I'll spare you the details, but use your imagination. Food contributes too. Rations that have gone bad in the heat. Boiled meat. Rancid fat. Moldy bread. Whatever you're eating, which isn't much and isn't good, adds its own layer to the smell. Vomit is not uncommon, especially for new crew members dealing with motion sickness, stress, and terrible air quality. That smell joins the mix. Blood has a distinctive metallic smell. After combat where crew members are wounded or killed, that smell permeates everything. It doesn't go away easily. Even after the bodies are removed, even after attempts to clean up, the smell of blood and viscera lingers in the metal and the upholstery. Diesel fuel, for crews in diesel-powered tanks like the British Churchill or later Shermans, adds another dimension. Diesel has a heavier, oilier smell than gasoline. It's cloying and persistent, coats your lungs when you breathe. When tanks catch fire, and they often do, the smell is indescribable. Burning rubber from hoses and seals. Melting electrical insulation creating toxic fumes. Ammunition cooking off. And if crew members don't get out in time, the smell of burning flesh and hair. This is the smell that haunts nightmares, the one veterans never forget. During wet conditions, add mold and mildew to the list. Water gets into the tank through various means. Puddles on the floor. Creates damp conditions perfect for mold growth. The musty smell of mildew joins all the other scents, creating something that would make a sewage treatment plant smell pleasant by comparison. Some crews tried to combat the smell. They'd hang air fresheners when they could find them. They'd spray cologne or aftershave around the interior. These attempts were futile. The smell was too pervasive, too deeply embedded in every surface. You weren't masking it. You were just adding perfume notes to a symphony of stench. The smell got into your uniform and stayed there. When crews rotated out for rest periods, they'd strip off their coveralls, and the smell would literally waft off them like visible fumes. Laundry services could wash these uniforms multiple times, and the smell would still linger. It became a mark of tankers. You could identify a tank crewman by smell alone. The worst part? You acclimate to it. After a few days, your nose basically gives up trying to process all the different odors. You stop noticing most of it. But then you climb out of the tank, breathe fresh air for a few minutes, and climb back in. That first breath back inside hits you all over again. The full force of the accumulated stench all at once. It's enough to make you gag. Veterans describe the smell as one of the most vivid memories they have of tank service. Decades later, certain scents would trigger instant flashbacks. The smell of diesel fuel at a gas station. The odor of gun oil at a shooting range. These would transport them back to that metal box and all the horrors it contained. Chapter 5. The Crew. You're not alone in this nightmare, which is both a blessing and a curse. Let's talk about the 4 other men you're locked in here with. Your tank commander is supposed to be an experienced sergeant or junior officer. Maybe he is. Maybe he's seen combat before and knows what he's doing. Or maybe he's a replacement, just like you, promoted because the previous commander is dead. You won't know until things get real, and by then it's too late. The commander sits in the turret, head up in the cupola when it's safe, giving orders and trying to coordinate with other tanks and supporting units. He's responsible for navigation, tactics, target identification, and keeping all of you alive. It's an impossible job, and most commanders are 22 years old and terrified, though they can't show it. Good commanders inspire confidence. They're calm under fire. They make quick decisions. They look out for their crew. Bad commanders get you killed through incompetence or panic or bad luck. You won't know which kind you have until the shooting starts. The gunner is the most technically skilled member of the crew. He operates the main gun and the coaxial machine gun. He has to acquire targets through a narrow gun sight, calculate range and lead, adjust for wind and terrain, and actually hit enemy tanks that are shooting back at him. It requires intense concentration and steady nerves. Most gunners are older, late 20s or early 30s, chosen for their calm demeanor and good eyesight. Your gunner's skill level directly correlates to your survival chances. A good gunner can engage and destroy enemy tanks before they destroy you. A mediocre gunner gets you into prolonged exchanges where luck becomes a factor. A bad gunner? You're probably going to die. The loader is usually the youngest crew member, 18 or 19, chosen for strength and stamina. His job sounds simple: take shell, load shell, repeat. But those shells are heavy. The 75mm high explosive rounds weigh about 28 pounds. Armor-piercing rounds are heavier. He's lifting these over and over in extreme heat in a confined space while the tank is moving and shaking and getting shot at. A fast loader can maintain a rate of fire that keeps the enemy suppressed. A slow loader gives the enemy time to aim and fire back. Loaders develop incredible upper body strength and endurance. They also develop chronic back problems and shoulder injuries. It's a young man's job because older bodies simply can't maintain the pace. The driver sits in the left front position, controlling the tank's movement using a complex system of levers and pedals. He has a very limited view of the outside world through a small periscope. He's steering a 30-ton vehicle over terrain he can barely see, following directions from the commander, trying not to get stuck or throw a track or drive into a ditch. Good drivers develop an almost supernatural sense of the terrain. They can feel through the controls when they're approaching obstacles. They learn to read the sounds the tank makes and know when something's wrong. Bad drivers get the tank stuck, break the transmission, or drive into minefields. And then there's you, the assistant driver and bow gunner. Your job is to operate the 30 caliber machine gun in the hull and help the driver navigate. You're also the first person out of the tank if you need to place a log under the tracks to get unstuck. You're the guy who does odd jobs, passes ammunition forward, and generally tries to be useful. Here's the thing about being locked in a tank with 4 other men. You're going to know them better than you've ever known anyone. You'll know what they smell like, what they sound like when they're scared, what they look like when they're wounded. You'll know their habits, their quirks, their breaking points. Crews bond intensely. You depend on each other absolutely. If the loader is slow, everyone suffers. If the gunner misses, everyone dies. If the driver makes a mistake, everyone pays. This creates relationships that are deeper than friendship. It's more like being in a dysfunctional family that you can never leave. But it also creates friction. 5 men in a space smaller than a large closet, stressed beyond measure, sleep-deprived, terrified, and exhausted. Tempers flare. Arguments erupt over nothing. Personality conflicts intensify. Someone's habit of humming might become the most annoying thing you've ever experienced. Someone else's body odor might make you want to commit violence. Some crews gel perfectly. They develop an almost telepathic coordination. Orders don't need to be spoken. Everyone just knows what to do. These crews have better survival rates. They function as a single organism, each part working in perfect harmony with the others. Other crews never quite mesh. They're always slightly out of sync. Orders get misunderstood. People get in each other's way. These crews struggle more and often suffer higher casualty rates. When someone dies or is badly wounded, the crew has to continue functioning. A replacement is assigned, usually someone who doesn't know the rest of you and doesn't understand how this particular crew works. There's an adjustment period that happens in the middle of combat. It's awkward, dangerous, and often fatal for the new guy. The psychological toll of crew dynamics is intense. You're watching your friends deteriorate under stress. You see them making mistakes from exhaustion. You watch their hands shake and their eyes lose focus. And you know they're watching the same things happen to you. Some crews developed rituals, lucky charms, superstitions. These gave them a sense of control in an uncontrollable situation. Everyone had to touch a certain part of the tank before mounting up. Everyone had to say the same phrase before combat. Break the ritual and everyone gets anxious. The best crews looked out for each other in small ways. Sharing the last cigarette. Giving up your portion of water when you see someone is really suffering. Covering for someone who's too exhausted to function. These small acts of kindness and solidarity were what kept crews together psychologically. But let's be clear. No amount of bonding changes the fundamental reality. You're 5 men locked in a death trap, and any one of you could be dead in the next 30 seconds. That knowledge colors every interaction, every relationship, every moment you spend together. Chapter 6. The routine. Let's talk about what a typical day looks like when you're not actively trying to kill or avoid being killed. You wake up, assuming you slept at all, to the sound of the engine starting. The commander or driver fires it up, and the whole tank shudders to life. The noise hits you like a wall. Your sleeping bag, which was providing minimal comfort on the hard metal floor, suddenly becomes unbearably hot as the engine begins generating heat. Morning routine in a tank is minimal. There's no shower, no sink, no bathroom. You have a canteen of water, and you decide whether you want to use a tiny bit of it to splash on your face or save it all for drinking. Most days you choose drinking. Personal hygiene becomes a luxury you can't afford. Breakfast, if you can call it that, consists of whatever rations you have available. K-rations or C-rations, usually. Maybe some crackers and a can of mystery meat. Maybe powdered eggs that taste like cardboard. You eat it cold because there's rarely time or opportunity to heat anything. The food is bland at best, revolting at worst, but it's calories and you need calories. You eat in your position because there's nowhere else to go. Crumbs fall onto the floor and get ground into the metal. Grease from the food gets on your hands, your uniform, the controls. Everything becomes coated in a thin layer of food residue mixed with dirt and oil. After eating, if there's time, you perform maintenance checks. The driver checks the engine oil, coolant, and track tension. The gunner checks the main gun's recoil mechanism and ensures the ammunition is properly stored. You and the loader check the machine guns, radio equipment, and general readiness of the tank. Maintenance is crucial. A broken tank is a dead tank. But maintenance requires getting out of the vehicle, and getting out makes you vulnerable. Snipers love tank crews during maintenance periods. So you work quickly, nervously, always aware that you're exposed. If you're in a combat zone, the day is spent moving from position to position. The tank rolls forward, navigating shell craters, ruins, and debris. Every bump sends shock waves through the suspension and into your spine. Your teeth rattle. Your organs compress and expand. It's like being in a washing machine filled with hammers. Movement is exhausting even when you're not doing the driving. The constant vibration, the noise, the heat, the fumes. You're being physically beaten just by existing in this moving metal box. After a few hours, your whole body aches. Your back throbs. Your legs cramp. Your head pounds. Communication with other tanks and command happens through radio, which is unreliable at best. Signals fade. Static overwhelms voices. You repeat messages multiple times. Misunderstandings are common and sometimes fatal. The radio operator, usually the commander, juggles multiple frequencies and conversations while also trying to fight the tank. Lunch is the same as breakfast. More rations eaten quickly, barely tasted. Water is rationed carefully. You might get a swallow every hour if you're lucky. More if it's very hot. But water resupply is uncertain, so you conserve. The afternoon might bring combat, or it might bring more waiting. Waiting is its own torture. You're sitting in the heat, in the noise, in the smell, doing nothing but anticipating the moment when everything goes wrong. Your nerves fray. Your imagination runs wild. You picture every possible way you could die. Some crews talk to pass the time. They'd share stories from home, discuss what they'd do after the war, argue about sports or women or anything that wasn't tanks and death. Other crews went silent, each man lost in his own thoughts, too exhausted or traumatized to engage. Combat itself, when it comes, is both the worst and most alive you'll feel. Suddenly, everything has purpose. The training kicks in. Adrenaline floods your system. Orders are shouted. The gun fires. Shells incoming. The tank maneuvers. It's chaos, but it's focused chaos. At least you're doing something instead of just waiting to die. After combat, if you survived, comes the aftermath. Assessing damage. Checking for wounded. Resupplying ammunition. Sometimes pulling dead crew members out of other tanks. Sometimes burying them if there's time. Often there isn't time, so you just move on and try not to think about the bodies. Evening brings no relief. You might logger up with other tanks for the night, forming a defensive position. You might be ordered to stay in place and maintain watch. Either way, you're still in the tank, still hot, still uncomfortable, still terrified. Dinner is more rations. By now, you're so tired you barely taste them anyway. You eat mechanically, fueling your body because you have to, not because you want to. Sleep, when it's your turn, is fitful. You curl up in whatever space you can find. Maybe in your position if you're small enough. Maybe on the turret floor. Maybe on top of the engine deck outside if you're truly desperate and it's not too dangerous. The metal is hard. The position is awkward. The noise continues even with the engine idling. You sleep in short bursts, never deeply. Every sound jerks you awake. Is that incoming? Is that the engine failing? Is someone attacking? Your body needs rest, but your mind won't allow it. You exist in a half-awake state that provides neither true rest nor true alertness. And then the engine starts again, and it's a new day, identical to the last one. Same heat, same noise, same fear, same routine, day after day, week after week, until you're rotated out or wounded or killed. This is your life now. There's no variety, no excitement beyond the terror of combat, no pleasure beyond surviving another day. Just the grinding routine of existence in a metal box, slowly wearing you down until there's nothing left. Chapter 7. The Vision Problem. Let's talk about what you can actually see from inside this steel coffin, because it's going to get you killed. Your entire view of the outside world comes through a periscope the size of a paperback book. That's it. That's your window to everything trying to kill you. The periscope gives you maybe a 30-degree field of view, and that's on a good day when it's clean and working properly. Most days it's neither. The periscope lens gets dirty immediately. Dust, mud, oil spray, rain. Every time the tank moves, debris gets kicked up. Every time the gun fires, smoke residue coats the optics. You're supposed to clean it regularly, but that requires stopping and exposing yourself outside the tank. So most of the time, you're looking through a layer of grime that turns everything into a blurry smear. What you can see through this limited view is a tiny slice of the battlefield directly in front of you. Everything else is invisible. You can't see to the sides without rotating the entire turret. You can't see behind you at all. You can't see the ground immediately around the tank. Enemy infantry can literally walk right up to you, and you won't know they're there until they're climbing on top or placing explosives against your armor. The commander, sitting in the cupola with his hatch open, has the best view. He can actually stick his head out and look around like a human being instead of a mole. But open hatches mean vulnerability. Snipers target commanders. Artillery fragments kill commanders. Smart commanders keep their hatches closed during combat, which means they're nearly as blind as everyone else. The gunner has a gun sight which is more sophisticated than your periscope, but it's even more limited in field of view. He's looking through a narrow tube trying to spot targets while the tank is bouncing over terrain and taking fire. It's like trying to thread a needle while riding a bucking bronco. Depth perception is non-existent. You're looking through a single lens so you can't judge distances properly. Is that enemy tank 500 yards away or 1,000? You're guessing. The gunner is guessing. Everyone is guessing based on experience and luck. In wooded or urban terrain, visibility drops to almost nothing. You're driving through a forest, and all you can see is the tree directly in front of you. You can't see the anti-tank gun hidden in the bushes 20 yards to your left. You can't see the infantry with Panzerfausts waiting in the building you're about to pass. German tank killers learned to exploit this blindness. They'd let Allied tanks roll past their positions, then hit them from the side or rear where the armor was thinnest. By the time you saw where the shot came from, if you ever did, it was too late. Dust was a massive problem in North Africa and other dry climates. A column of tanks moving across the desert would kick up enormous dust clouds. Visibility would drop to zero. You'd be driving blind, following the tank ahead of you by guessing where it was based on the slight difference in dust density. Collisions were common. Getting separated from your unit was common. Driving into minefields was common. Rain created different problems. Water would run down into the periscope. Condensation would form on the lenses. You'd be looking through a raindrop-covered window while trying to navigate and fight. Some crews tried to apply various substances to repel water. Nothing worked particularly well. Snow was even worse. It would accumulate on the optics. The driver's view would slowly white out as snow built up on his periscope. Someone would have to climb out during combat and clear the snow away. This happened multiple times per day in winter conditions. At night, forget it. Your periscope shows you nothing but darkness. There were no night vision devices. Some tanks had searchlights, but using them was suicide. You'd illuminate yourself and everything around you, making you a perfect target. Most night operations involved moving very slowly, hoping you didn't drive off a cliff or into an enemy position. The gunner trying to engage targets at night was operating almost entirely on faith. He might see a muzzle flash from an enemy gun. He'd aim at where he thought that flash came from and fire. Accuracy was abysmal. Most night combat was just shooting at shadows and hoping. Inside the tank at night, the dim lighting meant you couldn't see your own controls clearly. You'd operate by feel and memory. Loading the gun in darkness was dangerous. You could catch your hand in the breech. You could load the wrong type of shell. You could drop a shell on your foot, breaking bones. The restricted vision also meant you couldn't help each other effectively. The commander couldn't see what the driver was dealing with. The gunner couldn't see what the loader was struggling with. Each crew member was isolated in their own limited bubble of awareness, trying to coordinate through shouted commands over the engine noise. This is why tank infantry coordination was so important but so difficult. Infantry could see things the tank crew couldn't. They could spot anti-tank guns, clear buildings, warn of mines. But keeping infantry and tanks together in combat was nearly impossible. Tanks moved too fast. Infantry got tired or pinned down. The two would separate and then the tanks would die. Veterans talk about the paranoia that comes from this blindness. You know there are threats out there. You can hear them. Shells whistling past. Machine gun bullets pinging off armor. But you can't see them. You don't know where they're coming from. You're being hunted by an enemy you can't see. And all you can do is hope your armor holds and your crew is faster. Some crews tried modifications. They'd install extra mirrors, additional periscopes, anything to increase visibility. These helped marginally but never solved the fundamental problem. You're in a metal box, and metal isn't transparent. The psychological toll of this blindness was severe. Humans rely on vision to assess threats and navigate environments. Take that away, leave only a tiny, dirty peephole, and anxiety skyrockets. You feel trapped, helpless, vulnerable, because you are. Chapter 8. The food and water. Let's talk about sustaining your body in this metal hell, because eating and drinking in a tank is a special kind of misery. Your daily rations are supposed to provide around 3,000 calories. That sounds adequate until you consider you're burning calories at an extreme rate from stress, heat, and physical exertion. The loader alone probably burns that many calories just doing his job. You're going to be hungry, all the time, deep, gnawing hunger that your rations barely address. The standard fare is K rations or C rations. These are not food in any meaningful sense. They're compressed calories in forms designed for storage and transport, not consumption or enjoyment. A K ration might contain a can of meat product, some crackers, a candy bar, and instant coffee. The meat is usually Spam or something similar, packed in gelatin that separates in the heat. You eat this cold because there's rarely opportunity to heat anything. Cold Spam straight from the can, consumed with your fingers because utensils are a luxury you don't have space for. The texture is gelatinous and unpleasant. The taste is salt and vague meat flavoring. Your body accepts it as fuel, but your mind rebels. The crackers, called hardtack by some, are exactly as appetizing as they sound. They're hard enough to break teeth if you're not careful. Dry enough to suck every molecule of moisture from your mouth. They taste like cardboard infused with salt. You eat them because you must, not because you want to. The candy bar is the highlight of the ration. Except in the heat, it melts into a brown puddle. You'll squeeze it directly from the wrapper into your mouth. A stream of warm chocolate liquid that tastes like sweetness and depression. Water is the real crisis. Each crew member is supposed to have one canteen, about 1 quart of water. This has to last all day. 1 quart. while you're sweating profusely in 140-degree heat, while you're breathing dust and cordite fumes that dry out your throat, while your body is screaming for hydration. You ration it carefully, a sip every hour. Small sips, letting the water sit in your mouth to maximize absorption. The water is warm, almost hot, and tastes like metal and chemical purification tablets. But it's liquid, and your body needs it desperately. Running out of water during combat is a real possibility. Resupply is uncertain. Sometimes the supply trucks can't reach you. Sometimes they're destroyed. Sometimes there's just confusion and you get forgotten. Running dry means making terrible choices. Do you drink water from a shell hole, knowing it's probably contaminated? Do you try to salvage water from a destroyed vehicle, not knowing what's contaminating it? Do you just endure and hope you survive long enough to get resupply? Dehydration sets in quickly. First comes intense thirst, obviously, then headaches, then dizziness and confusion. Your physical performance degrades. Your mental acuity suffers. You make mistakes. In a tank, mistakes are fatal. Dehydrated loaders drop shells. Dehydrated gunners miss targets. Dehydrated drivers crash into obstacles. Some crews tried to supplement their water by collecting rain in tarps or helmets. This worked sometimes, but not reliably. Rain in combat zones is often contaminated with all sorts of unpleasant substances. You might be drinking water with residues of explosives, oil, or worse. The combination of inadequate food and water leads to weight loss. Tankers lost significant body mass during campaigns. 20, 30, even 40 pounds over a few months. You can see it in photographs. The crews that went in looking healthy come out gaunt, hollow-eyed, malnourished. Digestion in a tank is problematic. The stress, the heat, the terrible food, the dehydration. Many crews suffered from chronic diarrhea or constipation. Neither is pleasant in a tank where bathroom facilities don't exist. Diarrhea in particular becomes a crisis. You're losing fluids you can't afford to lose, and the practical aspects are horrifying. Some crews hoarded food when they could get extra. A can of peaches from a dead comrade's pack. Some chocolate from a care package. A loaf of bread from a liberated French bakery. This hoarding provided psychological comfort as much as physical sustenance. Having a little stash meant some control over your circumstances, even if that control was illusory. Spoilage was constant. The heat inside the tank meant anything perishable went bad quickly. Bread molded within days. Fruit rotted. Meat turned. The smell of rotting food added to the tank's already impressive stench. You'd eat it anyway, sometimes if you were hungry enough and couldn't get fresh rations. Field kitchens, when you could access them, provided hot meals. These were revelatory experiences. Actual warm food, prepared somewhat properly, in quantities that might actually satisfy hunger. But getting to a field kitchen meant being out of combat, off the line, which wasn't often. Most crews went weeks between hot meals. Coffee became vital. Not for the taste, which was terrible, but for the caffeine. Instant coffee mixed with water from your canteen, consumed cold. Tasted like bitter disappointment, but it kept you alert. Sleep-deprived crews relied on it heavily. Some developed caffeine dependencies that lasted long after the war. Cigarettes, while not food, became a form of sustenance. They suppressed appetite, calmed nerves, and provided a brief moment of normalcy. Most crew members smoked heavily. The cigarettes were included in rations for exactly this reason. The military knew what it was doing. Smoking killed your taste buds, which was actually helpful when eating care rations. The psychological aspect of eating in a tank can't be overstated. Humans use meals as social experiences, as moments of peace, as comforting rituals. In a tank, eating is purely functional. Cramming calories into your face while the tank bounces and the engine roars and someone might be aiming at you. There's no enjoyment, no relaxation, no comfort, just fuel consumption. After weeks of this dietary nightmare, crews became obsessed with food. Conversations would drift to favorite meals, restaurants from home, things they'd eat when the war ended. These discussions were equal parts hope and torture. Imagining a thick steak or fresh vegetables or a cold beer while you're choking down cold spam in a metal furnace. Chapter 9. The Fear of Fire. Of all the ways to die in a tank, and there are many, fire is the one that haunts every crew member's nightmares. Let's talk about why. Tanks are essentially mobile bombs. You're surrounded by fuel, ammunition, hydraulic fluid, and oil. The engine runs hot. The gun fires explosive shells. There's electricity running through various systems. Put all these elements together in a confined space, and you have perfect conditions for catastrophic fire. The Sherman tank earned a nickname among German tankers. The Ronson, after the cigarette lighter whose advertising slogan was, "Lights first time, every time." This wasn't a compliment. Shermans had a tendency to catch fire when penetrated, and that fire spread fast and burned hot. When a German 88mm shell punched through a Sherman's armor, it did more than just create a hole. The shell and fragments would ricochet around the interior, igniting anything flammable. Hydraulic fluid would spray and ignite. Ammunition would start cooking off. The crew had maybe 10 to 15 seconds to get out before the interior became an inferno. The early Sherman models stored ammunition in sponsons on the sides of the hull. This made it easy for loaders to reach shells, but also meant ammunition was in the most likely place to be penetrated. When a hit ignited these sponson ammunition racks, the fire was instant and overwhelming. Later models moved ammunition to the floor with water jackets around it, improving survival rates, but early war crews didn't have this advantage. Fire in a tank is not like fire in a building. You can't move away from it. The flames fill the entire interior in seconds. The temperature spikes to hundreds of degrees. The air becomes unbreathable. The metal conducts heat, turning every surface into a griddle. You're being cooked alive. Getting out of a burning tank is nearly impossible. The hatches are small and located in specific spots. In a Sherman, the driver and bow gunner have to exit through hatches in the front deck. The rest of the crew exits through the turret. If you're the loader or gunner, you have to climb up and out through the commander's hatch while fire is raging around you. Panic makes everything worse. You're supposed to move calmly and efficiently, but you're on fire and your friends are screaming and your instincts are telling you to get out now. People jam in hatches. They fight each other to escape. They make mistakes that cost them precious seconds. The commander, ironically, has the best chance of escape because he's already closest to a hatch. The bow gunner and driver often had the worst odds. They had to exit forward, climbing over transmissions and controls while flames engulfed the rear of the tank. Many didn't make it. Burns are horrific injuries. The lucky ones died instantly from the initial blast. The unlucky ones got out, but with severe burns covering significant portions of their bodies. Third-degree burns over the face, hands, any exposed skin. The pain is indescribable. The subsequent infections often proved fatal. Those who survived carried the scars, physical and psychological, for the rest of their lives. Crews developed obsessive habits around preventing fires. They'd check and recheck fuel lines for leaks. They'd ensure ammunition was properly stored and secured. They'd keep fire extinguishers readily accessible, though these were pitifully inadequate for a tank fire. These rituals provided a sense of control, even if that control was mostly illusory. The smell of smoke became a trigger for instant terror. Any whiff of burning that wasn't explained by the engine or gun would cause immediate alarm. Is that just oil on the hot exhaust, or are we about to become a fireball? This constant vigilance was exhausting but necessary. Some crews tried various modifications to reduce fire risk. They'd add extra armor or sandbags around ammunition storage. They'd drain and replace fluids obsessively. They'd remove anything flammable that wasn't absolutely necessary. None of this made them truly safe, but it helped psychologically. Watching other tanks burn was traumatic in its own way. You'd see another Sherman get hit. You'd watch smoke start pouring out. Maybe you'd see crew members emerge, on fire, rolling on the ground trying to extinguish themselves. Maybe you wouldn't see anyone emerge at all, and you'd know they died inside. And you'd know that could be you in the next engagement. The sound of ammunition cooking off in a burning tank is distinctive. Shells exploding in rapid succession, like fireworks but far more sinister. Each explosion meant another shell that could have been a weapon was instead contributing to killing your fellow tankers. The popping would continue for minutes or even hours until all ammunition was expended. After a battle, you'd pass burned-out hulks of tanks, the hatches thrown open, the interior charred black. Sometimes you'd see remains of crew members who didn't escape, burned beyond recognition, merged with the melted metal and upholstery. These sights embedded themselves in your memory. The fear of fire affected decision-making in combat. Some commanders were reluctant to engage at close range where penetration was more likely. Some crews would bail out too early, at the first sign of smoke, abandoning a tank that might have been salvageable. Others would stay too long, trying to fight the fire or save the tank, and die for it. Tankers often slept outside their tanks when possible, despite the tactical disadvantages. Being inside a stationary tank at night, unable to see threats, knowing that an artillery shell could turn it into an oven, was psychologically unbearable for many. Better to sleep in a foxhole and risk small arms fire than be trapped in a metal coffin. The introduction of wet ammunition storage in later Sherman models improved survival rates significantly. Ammunition racks surrounded by water jackets were much less likely to catch fire when hit. This simple modification saved countless lives. But it came too late for many early war crews. Training couldn't really prepare you for the reality of tank fire. You could practice evacuation drills. You could learn the theoretical procedures. But actually experiencing the heat, the smoke, the panic, the knowledge that you have seconds to live if you don't escape, nothing prepares you for that. Veterans of tank warfare often developed fire-related phobias that lasted decades. They couldn't be in enclosed spaces. They couldn't tolerate smoke or burning smells. Some couldn't even be near ovens or fireplaces. The trauma of watching friends burn, or nearly burning themselves, left permanent psychological scars. Chapter 10. The Combat Experience. Everything we've discussed so far is the baseline misery of tank life. Now let's talk about what happens when someone actually tries to kill you. The first indication that you're under fire is usually a sound. Maybe the crack of a bullet hitting your armor. Maybe the whistle of an incoming shell. Maybe an explosion nearby that rattles your teeth. Whatever it is, it triggers an immediate cascade of biological responses. Your heart rate spikes. Adrenaline floods your system. Time seems to slow down and speed up simultaneously. The commander starts shouting orders. Target location, direction, distance. The gunner is already traversing the turret, trying to acquire whatever is shooting at you. The loader is pulling a shell from the ready rack. The driver is trying to maneuver to make you a harder target. You're manning your machine gun, sweeping your limited field of view for enemy infantry. Everything happens fast and slow at the same time. Your training kicks in, and your hands move automatically. But your conscious mind is screaming in terror. You're aware of every vulnerability, every piece of armor that might not stop the next shell, every system that could fail, every way you could die in the next few seconds. The gun fires. The noise is catastrophic. The recoil rocks the entire tank. Smoke and fumes fill the turret. The loader is already reaching for the next shell, his movements almost mechanical in their precision and repetition. The gunner is watching for the result of the shot. Did it hit? Did it penetrate? Is the target neutralized? Meanwhile, return fire is incoming. Shells are hitting your armor or exploding nearby. Each impact sounds like the end of the world. The tank rings like a bell. The force of the impact throws you against whatever surface is nearest. You don't know if the armor held until a second passes and you're still alive. Spalling is a constant threat. Even when armor stops a shell from penetrating completely, the impact can break off pieces of metal from the interior surface. These fragments become high-velocity projectiles inside the crew compartment. They tear through flesh and bone. Many tankers were killed by spalling even though the armor technically held. The driver is wrestling with the controls, trying to move the tank, present different angles of armor, get to cover. But a 30-ton vehicle doesn't respond instantly. It's sluggish and ponderous. Every movement takes time you don't have, and the driver can barely see where he's going through his tiny periscope. Communication becomes critical and impossible simultaneously. Everyone is shouting over the intercom. The radio is squawking with messages from other tanks and command. The engine is roaring. The gun is firing. It's auditory chaos. Orders get missed or misunderstood. Critical information gets lost in the noise. You're firing your machine gun at anything that moves, anything that might be a threat. Infantry with anti-tank weapons are priority targets. German Panzerfausts can kill you just as dead as a tank round. You're spraying bullets, hoping something connects, unable to tell if you're hitting anyone through your limited vision. The smell changes during combat. The cordite is overwhelming now. The smoke from the gun is acrid and choking. If you've been hit, you might smell fuel leaking or electrical systems shorting out. Your nose becomes a threat detection system. Is that smoke from the gun? Or is something on fire? Time becomes meaningless. A combat engagement might last 2 minutes or 20. You can't tell. Your perception is warped by adrenaline and terror. What feels like an hour might be 30 seconds. Your body is in pure survival mode, operating on instinct and training. The loader is the most physically exhausted. He's grabbed, lifted, and loaded maybe 10 shells in as many minutes. Each one weighs 25 to 40 pounds. He's doing this in extreme heat while the tank is being shot at. His muscles are screaming. His lungs are burning. But he can't stop because stopping means dying. The gunner is locked into his sight, world narrowed to crosshairs and targets. He's tracking movement, calculating lead, adjusting for range. His universe exists only in that small circle of magnified vision. Everything else ceases to exist. Target, aim, fire, next target. It's a cycle repeated until the threat is gone or you are. The commander is trying to maintain situational awareness, which is nearly impossible. He's tracking friendly tanks, enemy tanks, infantry, terrain, orders from higher command. He's making split-second decisions that will result in survival or death. The weight of responsibility is crushing, but there's no time to feel it. Only act. When you're hit hard, when a shell penetrates, time fractures. There's a moment of confusion. What happened? The interior is suddenly full of smoke and flying metal. Someone is screaming. Maybe that someone is you. Your ears are ringing so loudly you can't hear anything else. You're checking yourself for wounds, not sure if that wet sensation is sweat or blood. The next few seconds determine if you live or die. Is the tank on fire? If yes, you have maybe 10 seconds to evacuate. Can you move? Are you wounded? Can you reach the hatch? Is someone blocking your exit? These questions cycle through your mind at lightning speed. If you're wounded but can move, you climb. You claw your way toward the hatch. Other crew members might be trying to escape simultaneously. You might be climbing over someone who's dead or too wounded to move. You might be pushing them aside. Survival instinct overrides everything else. Getting out of the hatch while under fire is its own nightmare. You're exposed. Snipers target crew members evacuating burning tanks. Machine guns sweep the area. You might escape the tank only to be killed in the open. But staying inside a burning tank is certain death, so you take your chances. If the tank isn't burning, if it's just damaged, you have to make a decision. Try to repair it, abandon it, keep fighting with whatever systems still work. These decisions are made under extreme stress with incomplete information and a strong desire to not die in the next 5 seconds. Sometimes combat is a quick, sharp engagement. You encounter an enemy tank, exchange fire for a few minutes, someone wins, someone loses. Other times it's a prolonged, grinding affair. Hours of maneuvering, shooting, taking cover, repositioning. Both are exhausting in different ways. After the immediate threat passes, assuming you survive, comes the aftermath. Checking for damage, accounting for casualties, resupplying ammunition. Your hands are shaking so badly you can barely hold a shell. Your whole body is trembling from adrenaline dump. Some crew members vomit. Others sit in stunned silence. Some crack jokes, gallows humor to cope with what just happened. You're alive, for now, but you know you'll have to do this again. Tomorrow or later today or in an hour. The enemy is still out there, and next time you might not be so lucky. Chapter 11. The mechanical failures. Even without enemy action, Your tank is constantly trying to kill you through sheer mechanical hostility. Let's talk about all the ways this machine breaks down. The Sherman, like all tanks, is a complex mechanical system pushed to its operational limits. You're running an aircraft engine at maximum output for hours at a time. You're putting stress on transmission and suspension components that were never designed for this kind of punishment. Things break constantly. Track failure is common and catastrophic. You're rolling on metal tracks consisting of dozens of individual links held together with pins. Any one of those links can fail. Any one of those pins can shear. When this happens at speed, the track can break and whip around with enough force to kill anyone nearby. More commonly, it just falls off and now you're immobilized. A tank that can't move is a dead tank. You become a stationary target. Artillery can zero in on you. Enemy tanks can maneuver for optimal angles. Infantry can approach with impunity. The crew has to decide, do we attempt repairs under fire, or do we abandon the vehicle? Track repair is brutally hard work. The tracks are heavy. You need special tools. You have to somehow get the broken link off and a new one on, all while working in the open, exposed to enemy fire. Can take hours even under ideal conditions. Under combat conditions, it's nearly impossible. The transmission is another weak point. The Sherman's transmission is complex and temperamental. It can grind itself to pieces under heavy use. Gears strip, bearings fail, fluid leaks out. When the transmission goes, you might be able to limp along in one gear, or you might be completely immobilized. Engine failures range from minor to catastrophic. Oil lines rupture, spraying hot oil everywhere. Cooling systems fail, causing the engine to overheat and seize. Fuel pumps stop working. Electrical systems short out. Each failure requires diagnosis and repair, often with limited tools and parts, under less than ideal conditions. The suspension is constantly being pounded. You're driving over broken terrain at speeds these components weren't really designed for. Springs break. Bogie wheels crack. Shock absorbers fail. Each failure makes the ride rougher and puts more stress on other components, creating a cascade of breakdowns. The gun itself can malfunction. The recoil mechanism can fail, making the gun dangerous or impossible to fire. The breech can jam, requiring manual clearing while under fire. The traverse and elevation systems can break, limiting your ability to aim. Each malfunction reduces your combat effectiveness and increases your vulnerability. Electrical systems are primitive by modern standards and fail regularly. The radio stops working, cutting off communications. The intercom dies, forcing crew members to shout to be heard. Lights fail, making night operations impossible. The starter motor gives up, requiring hand cranking the engine, which is exactly as difficult and dangerous as it sounds. Fuel system problems are both common and terrifying. Fuel lines can rupture, creating fire hazards. Fuel pumps fail, starving the engine. Tanks leak. You're constantly dealing with fuel-related issues while surrounded by ammunition and heat sources. Every fuel problem carries the risk of catastrophic fire. The hydraulics that power the turret traverse can fail, requiring manual traverse. This means physically pushing the turret around using hand cranks. It's exhausting work and painfully slow. In combat, slow turret traverse means you can't track moving targets effectively. You're at a severe disadvantage. Ammunition can malfunction too. Shells can have defects that cause them to jam in the breech. Propellant charges can be damaged, affecting performance. Primers can fail to ignite. Each malfunction requires clearing the gun, which takes time and exposes you during combat. Crew fatigue contributes to mechanical failures. Tired crews make mistakes in operation and maintenance. They miss warning signs of impending failures. They forget crucial maintenance tasks. They operate systems outside safe parameters because they're too exhausted to care or notice. Extreme temperatures exacerbate all mechanical issues. In heat, fluids thin out and leak more easily. Seals dry out and crack. Components expand and bind. In cold, fluids thicken and don't lubricate properly. Seals become brittle. Batteries lose capacity. Both extremes push the tank beyond its operational envelope. Spare parts are always in short supply. You might know exactly what's wrong and how to fix it, but if you don't have the part, you're stuck. Field maintenance crews perform miracles with improvisation, cannibalizing parts from destroyed tanks, fabricating repairs with whatever materials are available. But sometimes there's just no fix available. When multiple systems fail simultaneously, which happens more often than you'd think, prioritization becomes critical. Do you fix the engine or the tracks first? Do you address the gun issue or the radio problem? Each decision affects combat readiness and survival odds. Some failures are immediately dangerous. A fuel line rupture near the hot engine. An electrical short that sparks near ammunition. A structural failure in armor plating that creates a weak point. These require immediate attention even under combat conditions. Other failures are slow degradations. Oil pressure slowly dropping. Transmission getting progressively harder to shift. Brakes becoming less responsive. These are easy to ignore when you're focused on survival, but they culminate in eventual catastrophic failure at the worst possible time. The crew develops an almost supernatural sense of the tank's mechanical health. They learn to hear changes in engine pitch that indicate problems. They feel vibrations through the controls that warn of issues. They smell fluids leaking or components overheating. This awareness is crucial for survival but adds another layer of stress. Mechanics who support tank units are worth their weight in gold. These men work miracles keeping vehicles operational. They work in all weather, under fire, with inadequate tools and parts. Without them, attrition through mechanical failure would render tank units ineffective within weeks. Chapter 12. The Infantry Threat. Enemy tanks are terrifying, but let's talk about the threat that's even worse. Enemy infantry with anti-tank weapons. A single infantryman with a Panzerfaust can kill your 30-ton tank. Think about that. One man on foot, armed with a weapon that costs maybe $20 to produce, can destroy a vehicle worth tens of thousands of dollars and kill its entire crew. This asymmetry is psychologically crushing. The Panzerfaust is simple and deadly. It's a disposable launcher with a shaped charge warhead. Effective range is maybe 60 to 100 yards, but it can penetrate the armor of almost any Allied tank. German infantry were extensively trained in its use. They were good at it. Very good. Your visibility problem makes infantry especially dangerous. They can hide anywhere. In a building, behind rubble, in a ditch, under a wrecked vehicle. You can't see them with your limited vision slits. They wait until you get close, then they fire. By the time you see the smoke trail, it's too late. The shaped charge warhead burns through armor using focused explosive force. It creates a jet of molten metal that penetrates the hull. Then it sprays metal fragments and burning material into the crew compartment. Everyone inside experiences instant trauma, death or severe wounds. The lucky ones never know what hit them. You need infantry support to counter enemy infantry, but coordinating tanks and infantry in combat is incredibly difficult. Infantry move slower than tanks. They get tired. They take cover. They become separated. You move forward with your infantry, then you look back, and they're not there anymore. Now you're alone in enemy territory with anti-tank teams hunting you. Urban combat is the absolute worst for this. Every window could hide an anti-tank weapon. Every pile of rubble. Every doorway. You're navigating narrow streets with limited maneuverability, and someone could be preparing to kill you from any direction. Your machine guns are inadequate to suppress all the possible threat positions. Some crews develop tactics to mitigate the infantry threat. They'd spray machine gun fire at every possible hiding spot before advancing. They'd work in pairs, with one tank providing overwatch while the other moved. They'd stick close to friendly infantry no matter what. But even perfect tactics couldn't eliminate the threat. The psychological aspect is crushing. You're in the biggest, toughest vehicle on the battlefield, but you're vulnerable to a teenager with a tube and a shaped charge. All your armor, all your firepower, means nothing against a weapon that can be carried by hand and costs almost nothing. Night attacks by infantry were particularly terrifying. They'd crawl close to parked tanks and place magnetic mines or grenades. Silent kills. The first indication something was wrong would be an explosion, and by then it was too late. Crews sleeping outside their tanks, which was common, were especially vulnerable. The close-range nature of anti-tank weapons means you can't engage them at safe distances. German doctrine emphasized getting close before firing. The infantry would let you pass, then hit you from the side or rear where armor is thinnest. Even if you survived the hit, you'd have no idea where it came from in time to retaliate. Different nations had different anti-tank weapons, each with their own nightmare characteristics. The German Panzerschreck was larger and had longer range than the Panzerfaust. Soviet anti-tank rifles, while less effective, were more numerous and could be fired from concealed positions repeatedly. British Piats had unpredictable accuracy but devastating power when they connected. The presence of anti-tank teams in an area changed everything about how you operated. You moved slower, more cautiously. You spent more ammunition suppressing potential positions. Your stress level elevated even higher than normal. Every shadow became a potential threat. Every sound made you flinch. Captured German anti-tank training manuals revealed their doctrine. Hide, wait, let the tank get close, aim for side or rear armor, fire, and immediately displace. Don't engage frontally if possible. Don't shoot at the first tank in a column. Let it pass and hit the ones behind. These tactics were devastatingly effective. Some areas became known as anti-tank kill zones. Bocage country in Normandy, with its hedgerows and limited visibility. Italian towns with their narrow streets and stone buildings. These environments favored defenders with anti-tank weapons and made tank operations suicidal. The crew's paranoia about infantry threats led to some tragic mistakes. Friendly infantry got machine-gunned because a nervous gunner thought they were enemy. Civilians died because they appeared in the wrong place at the wrong time. The fog of war and the fear of anti-tank weapons created a trigger-happy atmosphere that resulted in unnecessary casualties. Your only real defense against infantry was vigilance and firepower. You had to see them before they saw you. You had to identify and engage them before they could set up for a shot. This required constant scanning, constant tension, constant readiness to fire. It was exhausting mentally and led to false alarms and wasted ammunition. When hit by an anti-tank weapon, your survival depended on luck and crew reaction time. Some shots failed to penetrate fully. Some hit non-critical areas. Some hit but failed to detonate properly. But when they worked as designed, the results were horrific. Instant carnage in the crew compartment. Fire, panic, death. The infantry threat meant you could never relax, even in supposedly secure areas. Infiltrators could work their way behind lines. Bypassed pockets of resistance could suddenly become active. The battlefield was fluid, and safety was an illusion. Chapter 13. Coordination and Communication. Operating a tank requires 5 men to function as a single organism. When communication works perfectly, you're dangerous. When it breaks down, you're dead. Let's talk about why it almost always breaks down. The intercom system is your lifeline for internal communication. It consists of throat microphones and earphones for each crew member. In theory, the commander gives orders, and everyone hears and executes them. In practice, the system is a disaster. The throat microphones are sensitive and pick up everything. Engine noise, gunfire, your own breathing and heartbeat. They create a chaotic audio mix where actual words get lost in the noise. You find yourself shouting into the microphone, which only makes the distortion worse. The earphones are uncomfortable and don't block out external noise. You're trying to listen to orders while the engine is screaming and the gun is firing and shells are impacting. Good luck distinguishing the commander's voice from all the other noise. Crews develop a kind of selective hearing, filtering out everything except command words, but it's an imperfect skill. The system malfunctions constantly. Connections work loose from vibration. Wires fray and short out. Battery power fails. You'll be in the middle of combat, and suddenly half the crew can't hear each other. Communication devolves to shouting and hand signals, neither of which work well in a tank. The commander bears the heaviest communication burden. He's got the intercom connecting him to his crew. He's got a radio connecting him to other tanks in the platoon. He's got another radio frequency for battalion command. He's supposed to monitor all of this, make decisions, and give coherent orders. This cognitive overload. Radio discipline was supposed to keep communications clear, but in combat, discipline evaporates. Everyone talks over everyone else. Different units share frequencies and create interference. Enemy jamming adds static and confusion. Critical messages get lost in the noise. Radio equipment is temperamental. The SCR 508 or SCR 528 radios used in Shermans were state-of-the-art for their time, which means they were still unreliable primitive devices. They'd cut out at critical moments. Batteries would die. Antennas would get shot off. Reception was poor in certain terrain. The radio operator, usually the commander, has to tune the radio manually. This requires turning knobs and adjusting frequencies while also commanding the tank and watching for threats. It's multitasking under extreme stress. Mistakes are common. Units lose contact with each other. Tanks become isolated. Coordinating multiple tanks in a platoon requires constant communication. Formations have to be maintained. Movement has to be synchronized. Fire has to be coordinated. One tank spots a target, communicates it to the others, they all engage. But when communication breaks down, coordination collapses. Language barriers existed in some units. American tank crews included immigrants who spoke limited English. British crews working with Canadian or Polish units faced communication challenges. These barriers weren't insurmountable but added another layer of difficulty to an already complex problem. Nonverbal communication inside the tank was limited by poor visibility. The commander couldn't see what the driver was dealing with. The gunner couldn't see the loader struggling with a jammed shell. Everyone operated in their own bubble, connected only by voice, which often didn't work. The loader and gunner had to develop almost telepathic coordination. The gunner needs to know when the gun is loaded. The loader needs to know what type of shell the gunner wants next. In the heat of combat, with the intercom malfunctioning, this coordination happened through touch and intuition. The driver received minimal information about what was happening around him. The commander would give direction: left, right, forward, stop. But the driver couldn't see why these orders were being given. He had to trust completely that the commander knew what he was doing and wouldn't drive them into danger. Miscommunication led to friendly fire incidents. One tank would engage what it thought was an enemy, only to realize too late it was shooting at a friendly. Radio calls for fire support would include wrong coordinates. Units would bombard their own positions. Communication failures killed soldiers on both sides. The stress of combat degraded communication further. People spoke too fast or too slowly. They used unclear terminology. They assumed others understood context that wasn't shared. Simple messages became garbled. Complex messages became impossible. Some crews developed their own communication shortcuts. Code words for common situations. Simplified terminology. Non-standard but mutually understood signals. These worked within that specific crew but could cause confusion when new members joined or when coordinating with other tanks. Environmental factors affected communication. Rain created static on the radios. Cold affected battery performance. Heat caused equipment to overheat and fail. Dust clogged connections. Every environmental extreme made communication harder. The necessity of communication while simultaneously operating complex systems created cognitive overload. The commander trying to talk, listen, observe, and make decisions. The gunner trying to communicate while also tracking targets and firing. The loader trying to report ammunition status while physically exhausting himself. Everyone was doing too many things at once. After action, communication failures were often identified as contributing factors in losses or mission failures. Tanks that weren't where they were supposed to be because orders weren't received. Targets that weren't engaged because information wasn't communicated. Friendly forces hit because recognition signals weren't given. Improved communication systems came later in the war, but for most crews, the struggle to coordinate and communicate remained constant. It was one more source of stress, one more way things could go wrong, one more factor determining whether you survived the day. Chapter 14. Sleep deprivation. Let's talk about what happens to your mind and body when you go days or weeks without proper sleep while being actively hunted. Sleep in a tank is nearly impossible. Even when you have the opportunity, which is rare, the conditions make actual restorative rest almost unattainable. You're exhausted to the point of hallucination, but sleep won't come or won't stay. The noise never stops. Even with the engine shut down, there's always sound. Metal contracting as it cools. Wind howling past the hull. Distant artillery. Radio static if someone left it on. Your brain can't fully disengage because it's constantly processing auditory stimuli that might be threats. When you do manage to drift off, you wake up every few minutes. Maybe from a loud noise. Maybe from a nightmare. Maybe from the pain of lying on a hard metal surface. You never reach deep sleep, that restorative phase your body desperately needs. You exist in a perpetual state of light dozing and sudden waking. Your bed is wherever you can fit your body. Maybe the turret floor if you're small enough. Maybe your seat if you can contort into a position that doesn't immediately cause cramps. Maybe outside the tank if tactical situation permits. None of these options are comfortable. All of them are barely adequate. The temperature is always wrong for sleeping. Too hot and you're sweating, shifting constantly, trying to find a cooler position that doesn't exist. Too cold and you're shivering, muscles tense, unable to relax. The thin sleeping bag or blanket you have, if you have one, is inadequate for the cold and excessive for the heat. Mental stress prevents sleep even when physical conditions allow. Your mind races, replaying the day's combat, imagining tomorrow's threats, worrying about things you can't control. The adrenaline from combat takes hours to metabolize out of your system. You're tired but wired, a horrible combination. The guard rotation means even if you do fall asleep, someone will wake you for your watch shift. You get maybe 2 or 3 hours before it's your turn to sit in the darkness, staring at nothing, fighting to stay alert while your body screams for rest. Cumulative sleep deprivation has devastating effects. After a few days, your cognitive function degrades noticeably. You become slower to process information. Decision-making becomes impaired. You miss obvious details. You make mistakes that could get you killed. Hallucinations start after about 72 hours without sleep. You see movement in your peripheral vision that isn't there. You hear voices calling your name. Objects appear to shift and move. You know intellectually that these aren't real, but your brain can't distinguish sensory input from imagination anymore. Physical coordination suffers. The loader starts dropping shells or fumbling with them. The driver's reaction time's slow. The gunner's hands shake, making precise aiming impossible. Everyone becomes clumsy and accident-prone. Injuries from simple mistakes become common. Your emotional regulation breaks down. Small frustrations become major sources of rage. You snap at crew members over nothing. You might cry for no apparent reason. You laugh at things that aren't funny. Your emotions become unpredictable and intense. Microsleep becomes a serious problem. Your brain just shuts down for a few seconds without your conscious control. You might be in the middle of a task and suddenly 5 or 10 seconds are missing. In a tank, during combat, those few seconds can be fatal. The immune system weakens with sleep deprivation. Crews become more susceptible to illness. Common colds turn into serious respiratory infections. Minor wounds don't heal properly. You're constantly sick on top of being exhausted. Appetite changes with severe sleep deprivation. Some people lose all desire to eat. Others develop intense cravings for specific foods. Either way, proper nutrition becomes difficult, further degrading physical performance. The eyes suffer particularly. They become dry, irritated, and painful. Vision blurs. Sensitivity to light increases, which is problematic when you need to look through bright periscopes or into the sun. Some crew members develop persistent eye infections from rubbing their eyes with dirty hands while exhausted. Memory formation breaks down. You'll go through an entire day and barely remember any of it later. Events blend together. You can't recall whether something happened yesterday or 3 days ago. This makes after-action reports difficult and adds to the general sense of disorientation. Paranoia intensifies with exhaustion. The normal fear and vigilance of combat amplify into irrational levels of suspicion and anxiety. You become convinced every sound is an enemy. Every order feels like a trap. Trust in your crew members and commanders erodes as your judgment fails. Some crews tried stimulants to combat exhaustion. Coffee when available, though the instant coffee in rations was barely effective. Some used tobacco heavily. A few had access to amphetamines, issued by medical personnel for critical operations, though these came with their own problems including crashes and addiction. The rare occasions when you got real sleep, maybe pulled off the line for maintenance or resupply, were almost worse. Your body, finally given permission to rest, would shut down completely. You'd sleep for 12 or 14 hours straight, dead to the world. Then you'd wake up disoriented, sore from immobility, and have to go right back to the sleep-deprived hell. Officers and commanders had it worse. They couldn't sleep even when lower-ranked crew members could. They had to maintain constant awareness of tactical situation, orders from higher command, positions of other units. Their sleep deprivation was even more severe and prolonged. The long-term effects of this extreme sleep deprivation persisted after the war. Many tankers developed chronic insomnia. Their brains had been so thoroughly trained to remain alert in dangerous conditions that they couldn't shut down even in safety. Decades later, they'd still struggle to sleep through the night. Chapter 15. The Psychological Breakdown. Your mind isn't designed to withstand what you're experiencing. Let's talk about what happens when it starts to fracture. The constant threat of death does something to your psyche that's hard to describe to people who haven't experienced it. You're always aware every single moment that you could die in the next second. This creates a baseline level of stress that's unsustainable. Your nervous system stays locked in fight-or-flight mode until it exhausts itself. Combat fatigue, shell shock, battle exhaustion. Different names for the same thing, your brain giving up trying to process the unprocessable. Symptoms vary, but they all indicate the same fundamental problem. You've been pushed beyond human psychological limits. Some men develop a 1,000-yard stare. Their eyes look through you rather than at you. They're present physically but absent mentally. They've retreated deep into themselves to escape the horror around them. They can still function sometimes, but they're not really there anymore. Others become hypervigilant to the point of dysfunction. They flinch at every sound. They see threats everywhere. They can't distinguish between actual danger and false alarms. Their nervous systems are stuck permanently in threat detection mode, flooding them with stress hormones at the slightest provocation. Emotional numbing is common. You stop feeling much of anything. Watching friends die doesn't produce sadness anymore. Killing enemy soldiers doesn't produce guilt. Nothing produces the emotional responses it should. You're going through the motions of being human without actually feeling human. Some crew members develop irrational superstitions and rituals. They have to touch a certain part of the tank before entering. They have to say specific words before combat. They have to wear lucky items even when it's impractical. These rituals give an illusion of control, but they indicate how fragile mental state has become. Intrusive thoughts plague everyone. Graphic images of death and destruction play on repeat in your mind. You can't stop imagining all the ways you might die. You picture the people you've killed. These thoughts come unbidden and won't leave. They're there when you're trying to work, trying to eat, trying to sleep. Dissociation becomes a coping mechanism. You mentally separate yourself from what you're experiencing. It's happening to someone else, not really you. You're watching it from outside your body. This helps you continue functioning but creates a disconnect from reality that can become permanent. Guilt accumulates in ways you don't expect. Not just from killing, though that's part of it. Guilt from surviving when others didn't. Guilt from mistakes that got someone hurt. Guilt from feeling relief when someone else's tank gets hit instead of yours. The weight of it becomes crushing. Trust issues develop with your own perceptions. After hallucinating from exhaustion, after mistaking shadows for threats, you start doubting what you see and hear. Is that really there? Or is your mind playing tricks again? This uncertainty makes everything more terrifying. Some men simply break. They curl up and won't move. They scream uncontrollably. They claw at themselves. They have to be physically removed from the tank and sent to the rear for psychiatric treatment. This happened more often than official records indicate because there was stigma and shame around mental casualties. The crew members who don't break openly might be worse off. They continue functioning while slowly disintegrating internally. They keep doing their jobs while their psyches crumble. The damage is less visible but just as severe. Moral injury is a specific type of psychological wound. It comes from doing things that violate your core values. Maybe you killed civilians accidentally. Maybe you didn't help wounded enemy soldiers. Maybe you abandoned equipment or position to save yourself. These actions conflict with who you thought you were, creating deep psychological distress. The lack of control eats at you psychologically. You can't control when combat happens. You can't control whether a shell hits your tank or the one next to you. You can't control tactical decisions made by commanders far removed from the fighting. This helplessness breeds despair and learned helplessness. Anger becomes a constant companion. Anger at the enemy. Anger at your commanders. Anger at the situation. Anger at yourself. It bubbles just beneath the surface, ready to explode at any provocation. Some channel it into fighting harder. Others turn it inward and become self-destructive. The future becomes impossible to imagine. You can't picture life after the war because you can't believe you'll survive. Planning for tomorrow feels absurd when you might be dead by this afternoon. You exist only in the immediate present, which is a psychologically unhealthy state to maintain. Relationships with crew members become complicated by psychological strain. You love these men more intensely than seems possible because you depend on them for survival. But you also resent them for being part of this situation. You're angry they're not doing more to keep you safe. These contradictory emotions create internal conflict. Some develop survivor's guilt preemptively. They start grieving for themselves and their crew before anyone's actually dead. They mourn the versions of themselves that won't survive the war, even if their bodies do. This anticipatory grief is its own form of psychological torture. Treatment for psychological casualties during the war was primitive. Sometimes just being pulled off the line for a few days' rest was enough to partially recover. Often it wasn't. Many men were given sedatives or other medications and sent back to duty still suffering. The understanding of combat trauma was limited. The military doctrine emphasized pushing through psychological pain. There was pressure to not show weakness, not to admit you were struggling, to maintain the appearance of strength and capability even when you were falling apart inside. This pressure prevented many from seeking help until they completely broke down. Veterans who survived the war often carried psychological wounds for decades. Post-traumatic stress disorder, though it wasn't called that yet. Persistent anxiety and depression. Flashbacks triggered by sounds or smells. Relationship difficulties. Substance abuse. The scars were invisible but permanent. Chapter 16. The ammunition hazard. You're not just surrounded by fuel and engine heat. You're also sitting next to dozens of explosive shells that could detonate at any moment. Let's talk about living inside a bomb. A fully loaded Sherman carries somewhere around 75 rounds of 75mm ammunition. Each round consists of a projectile and a propellant charge. Together they weigh between 25 and 40 pounds depending on type. Stacked together, you've got nearly a ton of explosives packed into the crew compartment. The ammunition is stored in various racks throughout the tank. Early Shermans had sponson racks on the sides of the hull. Later models moved ammunition to floor racks. Regardless of where it's stored, it's always close to you. You're always aware that you're surrounded by things that could explode. Different shell types serve different purposes. High explosive for soft targets. Armor-piercing for enemy tanks. White phosphorus for smoke screens and anti-personnel use. Each type has its own particular hazards. The white phosphorus rounds are especially terrifying because they burn at incredibly high temperatures and create toxic fumes. The shells are painted differently to indicate type, but in the dim interior light and the stress of combat, mistakes happen. The loader might grab the wrong type of round. He realizes this after it's loaded or worse, after it's fired. Using the wrong ammunition type can mean the difference between destroying an enemy tank and just annoying it. Heat affects ammunition. High temperatures can cause propellant charges to deteriorate or become unstable. The brass casings expand. Shells can become difficult to extract from racks or to load into the gun. Everything becomes more dangerous as temperatures rise. When your tank is hit and a shell penetrates, one of the primary concerns is ammunition detonation. The incoming shell and fragments ricochet around the interior, striking ammunition racks. If they strike the right way, the whole rack can cook off. This means multiple shells detonating nearly simultaneously. The blast is apocalyptic. No one survives. Ammunition fires start differently than fuel fires. There's often a delay between being hit and the ammunition catching fire. Shells heat up gradually until they reach detonation temperature. You might have a few seconds or a few minutes. This delay creates a horrible choice. Stay and try to fight the fire, or bail out immediately and abandon the tank. The sound of ammunition cooking off is distinctive and terrifying. Individual shells exploding in rapid succession. Pop, 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 bang, bang. Each explosion makes the tank shake. Shrapnel tears through the interior. The hull becomes a shrapnel generator, turning fragments into more projectiles. Crews developed intense awareness of ammunition status. How many rounds of each type remained? Which racks were empty and which were full? In combat, you wanted to shoot off the most vulnerable racks first, emptying the ammunition storage areas most likely to be hit. Handling ammunition was physically demanding and dangerous even without combat. The loader had to be careful not to drop shells. A dropped shell could damage the fuse, making it unstable. Could dent the casing, making it difficult to load. Could land on someone's foot, breaking bones. The brass casings become hot after firing. Immediately after the gun fires, the spent casing is ejected. It clangs onto the turret floor, radiating heat. Touch it wrong and you get a nasty burn. These spent casings accumulate, creating a tripping hazard and adding to the general chaos inside the tank. Some ammunition types were particularly dangerous to store and handle. The white phosphorus rounds could leak. The smoke rounds had fragile components. The shaped charge rounds were sensitive to shock. Every type had its own hazards that the loader had to remember and account for. Ammunition resupply was a vulnerable time. Supply vehicles would pull up, and crew members would hand-load shells into the tank. You're outside, exposed, lifting heavy objects, trying to work quickly. Enemy artillery or air attack during resupply could ignite the ammunition before it even got into the tank. The weight distribution of ammunition affected tank performance. A fully loaded tank handled differently than one with half its ammunition expended. The driver had to compensate for these changes. The gunner had to recalculate ballistics as weight distribution shifted. Quality control on ammunition varied. Some batches were fine. Others had defects. Shells that wouldn't chamber properly. Propellant charges that didn't ignite reliably. Projectiles that were slightly out of spec. You never knew if a particular round would work correctly until you tried to fire it. The introduction of wet ammunition storage dramatically improved survival rates. Ammunition racks surrounded by water jackets were much less likely to cook off when hit. The water absorbed heat and prevented the shells from reaching detonation temperature. But this technology came late for many crews. Even without combat, ammunition was dangerous. Crews cleaning and maintaining the tank had to move shells around. Each movement risked dropping one. Each shell moved was another opportunity for accident. After months of handling thousands of rounds, accidents were statistically inevitable. The psychological burden of living surrounded by explosives added to everything else. You're already stressed about enemy fire, mechanical failures, and all the other hazards. Add to that the knowledge that you're sitting on top of a bomb that could go off if things go wrong. It's one more layer of fear. Veterans sometimes mention that after the war, they couldn't stand to be around fireworks or similar explosions. The sound triggered intense flashbacks to ammunition cooking off. That distinctive pop and bang pattern was seared into their memory as the sound of impending death. Chapter 17. The Rare Moments of Humanity. Despite everything, there were brief moments that reminded you that you were still human. Let's talk about the fleeting instances of normalcy in this metal nightmare. Mail call was a big deal. Letters from home represented connection to a world where tanks and death didn't dominate everything. Reading a letter from your mother, your girlfriend, your buddy from school. These were windows into a reality you were beginning to forget existed. But mail was irregular and slow. Months could pass between letters. Sometimes letters arrived all at once, out of order, creating a confusing timeline of events from home. Sometimes letters never arrived at all, lost in the chaos of military logistics. And sometimes they brought bad news. Someone at home died, your girlfriend married someone else, your family was struggling. This news landed on you while you were already at your breaking point. Some crews brought small personal items. A photograph tucked into a uniform pocket. A good luck charm. A letter worn soft from being refolded hundreds of times. These objects became precious beyond their material value. They were anchors to identity, reminders that you were more than just a component in a tank. Music, when you could access it, provided relief. Maybe someone had a harmonica. Maybe you were near enough to a radio to catch broadcasts. Sometimes troops would organize impromptu entertainment with whatever instruments were available. These moments of music cut through the horror and reminded you of beauty. Food from non-military sources was magical. A farmer might share vegetables. A liberated town might have bread or cheese to offer. These simple foods tasted incredible compared to the monotonous rations. More than the taste, they represented kindness and normal human interaction. Some crews adopted mascots. A dog that started following the tank. A cat that took up residence in the crew compartment. These animals provided companionship and a focus for affection that wasn't complicated by the weight of military hierarchy or survival dependence. Humor helped. Gallows humor, crude jokes, pranks on each other when circumstances allowed. Laughter in the face of horror was a coping mechanism. It acknowledged the absurdity of the situation without surrendering to despair. Some of the jokes were probably only funny in context, to people living through that particular hell. Shared cigarettes became almost ceremonial. Passing a cigarette around the crew, everyone taking a drag. It was communion of sorts. A ritual that said, "We're in this together." The nicotine probably helped calm nerves too, though it was the sharing that mattered more than the substance. Conversations about life after the war served as escapism. What you'd do, where you'd go, who you'd be when this was over. These discussions were equal parts hope and pain. Hope that there would be an after, pain because you couldn't really believe it. But you talked about it anyway. Acts of kindness between crew members accumulated meaning. Sharing your water when someone was desperate. Giving up your sleeping spot to someone who needed it more. Covering for someone who was too exhausted to function. These small generosities maintained your humanity. Religious faith provided comfort for some. Prayer, scripture, religious items worn for protection. Whether you believed in divine intervention or not, these practices created moments of reflection and connection to something larger than the immediate horror. Rare moments of natural beauty cut through the ugliness. A sunrise that made even the battlefield briefly beautiful. Stars visible through the hatch on a clear night. These moments reminded you that the world contained more than just destruction. When pulled off the line for rest, even brief periods, the relief was indescribable. A hot meal, a chance to bathe, sleeping on something that wasn't metal. These ordinary comforts felt like luxury beyond measure. You savored every second because you knew it wouldn't last. Camaraderie went beyond just survival dependence. You actually liked some of these guys you were locked in with. You shared experiences no one else could understand. Bonds formed that would last the rest of your lives, assuming you survived. Letters written home became a way to process experiences. Putting words to paper forced you to organize your thoughts. Of course, you couldn't write about the worst parts. Censorship and a desire not to worry loved ones meant you sanitized your reports. But the act of writing itself was therapeutic. Some crews developed traditions. A specific greeting each morning. A particular phrase before buttoning up the tank. These rituals created continuity and predictability in an unpredictable environment. They were small islands of order in the chaos. Finding unexpected items during campaigns provided small joys. A bottle of wine in an abandoned house. A deck of cards. A book in English. These discoveries were treasures. They got passed around, shared, used until they fell apart. The moments when you could just be still were precious. Not waiting for combat, not moving, not working. Just existing. These were rare and fleeting but necessary for maintaining sanity. Human connection with civilians in liberated areas reminded you what you were fighting for. Seeing people freed from occupation, their gratitude and joy made the suffering feel purposeful. Though this could also create complicated emotions when you saw the destruction your fighting caused. Even in the worst circumstances, humans find ways to be human. You clung to these moments. They didn't make the horror acceptable, but they made it slightly more bearable. They reminded you that beneath the uniform and the trauma, you were still a person with thoughts and feelings and connections to something beyond the tank. Chapter 18. The end of the line. Eventually, one way or another, your time in the tank ends. Let's talk about how that happens. For some, the end comes suddenly and violently. An enemy shell penetrates in exactly the wrong place. The ammunition detonates. The fire spreads too fast to escape. Death comes in seconds, maybe painlessly if you're lucky, agonizingly if you're not. This is how many tank crews meet their end. Quick, brutal, final. For others, it's wounds. Maybe you survive the hit that kills the tank but take shrapnel. Maybe you lose limbs. Maybe you're burned severely. You're evacuated, treated if possible, sent home if you're lucky. Your war is over, but the effects last forever. Scars, disabilities, pain that never quite goes away. Some make it to the end of the war intact, physically at least. The fighting stops. The tanks fall silent. You climb out for the last time. The relief is overwhelming, but it's complicated. You survived when so many didn't. The guilt and confusion of that reality will follow you. The immediate aftermath of survival is strange. You've spent months or years in a constant state of hypervigilance and terror. Suddenly the threat is gone, but your body and mind don't believe it. You still flinch at sounds. You still scan for threats. You can't relax because relaxing has meant death for so long. Processing what you've experienced takes years, sometimes decades. The memories don't fade the way normal memories do. They stay vivid, intrusive, overwhelming. Smells trigger flashbacks. Sounds transport you back. You're never quite free of the tank, even when you're thousands of miles and many years removed. Relationships suffer. How do you explain to someone who wasn't there what it was like? You can't. The gap between your experience and their understanding is unbridgeable. You feel isolated even when surrounded by people. Only other tankers really understand, but talking about it with them means reliving it. Employment after the war is challenging for some. The skills you developed in the tank don't translate to civilian life. You're used to high-stress environments and constant danger. Normal jobs feel meaningless by comparison. Some veterans struggle to find purpose in a world that's no longer trying to kill them. Physical health problems emerge. The hearing damage from the noise. The back problems from the cramped positions. The respiratory issues from breathing fumes and smoke. The stress-related heart conditions. Your body was damaged in ways that continue to deteriorate over time. Mental health struggles persist for many. What would later be called PTSD, what they called shell shock or combat fatigue then, doesn't just go away when the war ends. Depression, anxiety, insomnia, substance abuse. These become lifelong battles for many veterans. Some cope by never talking about it. They lock those memories away and try to live normal lives. This works for some, creates more problems for others. The unexpressed trauma festers, affecting them in ways they don't recognize or acknowledge. Others find purpose in sharing their experiences, writing memoirs, giving interviews, educating new generations. This helps process the trauma and ensures the sacrifices aren't forgotten. Though reliving it through retelling is its own form of pain. Reunions with surviving crew members are emotionally complex. Joy at seeing men you thought you might never see again. Sadness for those who didn't make it. The awkwardness of trying to connect across decades and changed lives. You're bonded by experience but may have little else in common. The tanks themselves become relics. Museums display them as historical artifacts. You might visit one decades later, climb inside, and be transported back instantly. The smell isn't quite the same, the threat isn't there, but your body remembers. Your heart rate increases. Your hands shake. It's too vivid. Some veterans develop complicated relationships with their service. Pride in having served and survived. Anger at what they were put through. Grief for what they lost and who they became. These contradictions coexist, never fully resolved. Families of veterans carry secondary trauma. Spouses who live with partners who wake screaming from nightmares. Children who grow up with fathers who can't show affection or talk about their pasts. The trauma ripples outward, affecting generations. As veterans age, the memories often intensify instead of fading. The brain's filters weaken, and the traumatic memories become more vivid and intrusive. What they could manage and suppress in middle age becomes overwhelming in old age. Mortality brings its own reflections. Facing death at the end of a long life recalls facing death in that tank. Some veterans report becoming less afraid of death because they made peace with it decades ago. Others find their old fears returning with new intensity. The last surviving members of tank crews carry particular weight. They are the only ones left who remember specific battles, specific friends, specific moments. When they die, those memories die with them. The pressure to record and share before it's too late becomes urgent. Historical recognition varies. Some units get remembered and honored. Others are forgotten. Individual crews disappear into statistical summaries. The specific human experience gets lost in the broader narrative of war. This can feel like a second abandonment for those who served. The legacy is complicated. You did something incredibly difficult and dangerous. You contributed to victory in a just war. But the cost was severe and lasting. Was it worth it? Depends on the day you ask and the mood you're in when answering. For those who died in the tanks, there's no aftermath to process. Their story ended there. Their sacrifice is remembered, maybe in official records and memorial stones. But the individual human being, with hopes and fears and dreams, is reduced to a name and a date. Chapter 19. The Mud and Terrain. Let's talk about what the ground does to you, because the battlefield isn't a nice flat surface. It's a hell's cape of obstacles, craters, and substances that want to trap and kill you. Mud is your worst enemy after enemy tanks. Not the kind of mud you step in after a rainstorm. We're talking about thick, glutinous, bottomless mud that can swallow a 30-ton vehicle whole. This mud exists in a state somewhere between liquid and solid, with properties specifically designed to ruin your day. The tracks are supposed to provide traction. They're wide and distribute the tank's weight over a large surface area. In theory, this prevents you from sinking. In practice, mud doesn't care about your engineering. The tank settles into it inch by inch until you're belly down and going nowhere. When you first hit a mud patch, you might not realize how bad it is. The driver feels the tank slow slightly. He gives it more throttle. The engine roars. The tracks churn. And you sink deeper. The more you struggle, the worse it gets. The spinning tracks just dig you in further. Being stuck in mud during combat is a death sentence. You can't move. You can't maneuver. You're a stationary target. Enemy artillery can take their time ranging in on you. Anti-tank guns can line up perfect shots. You're trapped, waiting to die unless you can get unstuck fast. The crew has to dismount to try recovery. You climb out into the open, exposed to fire, and attempt to dig the tank out or place logs under the tracks for traction. This is backbreaking work. The mud clings to your boots, your clothes, your tools. Every shovel full weighs 10 pounds and accomplishes almost nothing. Sometimes you need another tank to tow you out. But that tank risks getting stuck too. Recovery vehicles exist for this purpose, but they're not always available and they're priority targets for the enemy. Watching your only hope of extraction get destroyed while you're still stuck is its own special horror. The mud gets everywhere inside the tank. It comes in on boots and clothes. It drips from hatches. It splashes up from the tracks and works its way into every crevice. The interior floor becomes slippery and treacherous. Controls get coated in mud and become harder to operate. Rain turns battlefields into swamps. What was passable ground yesterday becomes impassable today. Routes you relied on disappear under water and mud. You have to find new paths, and every new path is a risk. Mines, soft ground, hidden obstacles. Unknown terrain is dangerous terrain. The driver's visibility is already terrible. Add mud coating his periscope, and he's essentially blind. He's steering based on feel and guesswork, hoping he doesn't drive into a crater or off a cliff or into a river. The commander tries to guide him, but the commander can barely see either. Shell craters filled with water and mud become death traps. They look like puddles from a distance. The driver doesn't realize how deep they are until the tank is nose down in one, stuck at an angle, unable to move forward or back. If the crater is deep enough, the engine intake can submerge. Water gets sucked in. The engine dies. Now you're stuck and powerless. Winter brings different terrain nightmares. Frozen ground is hard as concrete. The tracks slip and slide. Steering becomes unpredictable. You're sliding more than driving, hoping you don't crash into obstacles or other vehicles. The lack of traction means you can't climb slopes you need to climb or stop as quickly as you need to stop. Snow hides everything. Craters, ditches, debris, mines. All of it disappears under white blanket. You're driving blind, hoping the ground beneath the snow is solid. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you break through into something that stops you cold or flips the tank. Ice is somehow worse than mud. At least mud gives some resistance. Ice gives nothing. The tracks spin uselessly. The tank might slide sideways down a slope, completely out of control. There's no preventing it, no correcting it. You're just along for the ride, hoping you don't slide into something that kills you. Forests and hedgerows limit mobility severely. The tank is too wide for many paths. Trees are obstacles that can damage the tank or stop it entirely. You're forced to follow predictable routes, which the enemy knows and has probably prepared. Ambushes in wooded terrain are common and deadly. The bocage country in Normandy was particularly awful. High earthen banks topped with thick hedgerows divided fields into small compartments. Tanks couldn't see over them or through them. Breaking through required exposing the tank's thin belly armor. The Germans set up in perfect defensive positions and picked off tanks one by one. Urban terrain presents its own obstacles. Rubble blocks streets. Buildings collapse and create barriers. You're navigating through a maze of destruction with limited visibility and multiple threats from every direction. The tank size that was an advantage in open country becomes a liability in tight city streets. Bridges are critical and terrifying. Many bridges can't support a tank's weight. You don't always know until you're on it whether it'll hold. Some bridges are deliberately weakened by retreating enemies. You might get halfway across before it collapses, dumping you and the tank into the river below. Rivers and water obstacles require special consideration. Some tanks can ford shallow water, but you need to know the depth and current. Get it wrong, and you're flooding the engine or being swept downstream. The driver can't see the bottom. He's trusting reconnaissance that might be outdated or wrong. Soft ground that looks solid can collapse under the tank's weight. Agricultural fields that seem fine can have irrigation ditches hidden beneath the surface. Marshland disguised by vegetation can swallow a tank before you realize what's happening. The ground itself is an enemy. Slopes are deceptive. What looks like a manageable incline might be too steep for the tank to climb with its current load and traction conditions. You commit to climbing, make it halfway, and then start sliding backward. The driver has to make split-second decisions about when to give up and when to keep trying. The tank throws tracks on rough terrain. A track pin shears from stress. The track comes off. Now you're immobilized again, needing hours of dangerous repair work in the open. Every kilometer driven over bad terrain increases the chance of mechanical failure. Mines are everywhere in the terrain, buried in roads, fields, approaches to key positions. The tank might survive hitting a mine depending on the type and placement, or it might blow a track off or penetrate the thin belly armor or detonate ammunition. You never know until it's too late. The psychological stress of bad terrain adds to everything else. You're already terrified of enemy fire. Now you're also terrified of the ground. Every meter forward could drop you into a crater or bog you down in mud. The constant vigilance required is exhausting. Some crews develop superstitions about certain types of terrain. Never cross that field. 3 tanks have died there. Whether the field was actually cursed or just badly mined didn't matter. The belief affected morale and decision-making. After battles, the terrain gets worse. More craters, more debris, more destroyed vehicles blocking paths. The battlefield becomes progressively less passable. Routes that worked yesterday don't work today. You're constantly adapting to deteriorating conditions. The terrain also affected your relationship with other units. Infantry could go places tanks couldn't. Tanks provided support infantry needed but couldn't always get to where infantry was. The terrain created gaps in coordination that the enemy exploited. Veterans remember the terrain as vividly as the combat. Specific hills they couldn't climb, particular mud holes that trapped them, rivers they barely forded. The ground shaped their experience as much as enemy action did. Chapter 20. Death inside the tank. We need to talk about what happens when someone in your crew dies but you're still in combat. This is the nightmare that haunts tankers decades later. A shell penetrates. Metal fragments ricochet through the crew compartment. Someone screams, then goes silent. You look over, and one of your crew isn't moving anymore. The loader slumps against the ammunition rack. Or the gunner's head is tilted at an impossible angle. Or the driver stops responding to commands. They're dead, and you're still fighting. There's no time to process it. The battle is still happening. Enemy tanks are still shooting. You have seconds, maybe, before the next round hits. Your friend is dead 3 feet from you, and you have to keep working. Keep fighting. Keep trying to survive. The body becomes an obstacle. The loader is dead, so someone else has to load the gun. The commander might have to climb down and take over, but that means he can't command effectively. Or the gunner tries to reach shells while still operating the gun. Every movement is complicated by the presence of a corpse in a confined space. The smell of blood fills the confined space immediately. It's metallic and wrong. It mixes with all the other smells, the cordite and diesel and sweat. But the blood smell is distinctive, impossible to ignore. Your friend's blood is on the floor, on the walls, probably on you. Shock affects everyone differently. Some crew members shut down emotionally and just keep functioning mechanically. Others panic. Some become enraged and fight harder. There's no right response. Your brain is trying to process something it can't process while staying focused on staying alive. The commander has to make impossible decisions. Do we stop and evacuate the body? Do we keep fighting? If we stop, we might die. If we keep fighting with a dead crew member, we're less effective and might die anyway. There's no good choice, only degrees of terrible. Sometimes the dead crew member blocks access to critical systems. The driver's body is slumped over controls the commander needs. The loader's body is blocking ammunition racks. You have to move a corpse, your friend's corpse, while shells are hitting your armor. The physical act of moving dead weight in combat conditions is horrific. Injuries that aren't immediately fatal create worse situations. They're screaming or crying or begging for help. You can't help them. You don't have medical supplies adequate for serious wounds. You can't evacuate during combat. All you can do is try to keep them comfortable and keep fighting. The choice of who takes over a dead crew member's position creates guilt that lasts forever. If the loader dies, someone has to load. Whoever takes that job is now doing 2 jobs under extreme stress. They're exhausted. They make mistakes. Those mistakes might get everyone killed. And they blame themselves for not being good enough to do both jobs perfectly. Blood makes surfaces slippery. The turret floor becomes treacherous. Controls are slick. You're trying to do your job while literally standing in your friend's blood. Trying not to slip, trying not to think about what you're standing in. The psychological damage of continuing to fight alongside a corpse is severe and permanent. You can't look at the body, but you can't not be aware of it. It's there in your peripheral vision. You hear it shifting as the tank moves. The disconnect between "this was my friend" and "this is just meat now" breaks something in your mind. Some crew members talk to the dead, trying to maintain the illusion of their presence. "Hang on, buddy. We'll get you out soon." They know the person is gone, but the fiction helps them cope. Other crew members can't look at the body at all, turning away and trying to pretend it's not there. When there's finally a lull in combat, when you can stop and deal with the body, the reality hits fully. You have to remove your friend from the tank. They're heavy and awkward and starting to stiffen. You have to lift them through a small hatch, trying to be respectful but also just trying to get it done before fighting resumes. Multiple casualties in one tank are worse. 2 or 3 crew members dead or dying. The survivors are trying to operate a vehicle designed for 5 people with only 2 or 3. It's nearly impossible. Some functions just can't be performed. The tank becomes less a fighting vehicle and more a mobile tomb. The bodies can't always be evacuated immediately. Sometimes you have to keep fighting, and the dead crew member stays in the tank for hours or even days. In hot weather, decomposition starts quickly. The smell becomes unbearable. But there's no choice. The mission continues. Crew members who survive when others die carry guilt forever. Why them and not me? There's no answer that satisfies. Pure luck, random chance, 3 feet of difference in where you were sitting. It doesn't feel like enough reason for why you're alive and they're not. The empty positions haunt you. The loader's spot is vacant. You keep expecting to see him there, then remember he's gone. Your brain hasn't caught up with the new reality. You might even call out to them before remembering they can't answer. Replacement crew members are necessary but create their own trauma. A new guy climbs into the position where your friend died. Maybe there's still bloodstains. Maybe the replacement sits in the same spot, touches the same controls. It feels wrong, like a violation, even though it's necessary. Some crews couldn't function after losing members. The psychological cohesion breaks. They might still be technically capable of operating the tank, but they've lost the coordination and trust that kept them effective. These crews often suffered additional casualties. The moment of death itself stays with you. You might have seen it happen. The instant your friend was there and then wasn't, not really. That image doesn't fade. 50 years later, you'll still see it in perfect clarity when you close your eyes. Letters to families of the dead fell to surviving crew members or commanders. What do you say? How do you describe what happened without traumatizing people who weren't there? Most letters were generic and vague. He died bravely serving his country. The reality was too horrible to share. Personal effects of the dead had to be collected and sent home. Going through their pockets, their bags, gathering their few possessions. It's intimate and invasive and necessary. You find letters from home, photographs, small treasures. Each item is a reminder that this was a person with a life outside the tank. Some crews held quick informal services when possible. A few words over the body before it's taken away. A moment of silence. These rituals helped create closure, though closure was never really complete. The war didn't pause for grief. The fear after losing crew members intensifies. You've now seen firsthand how quickly death comes, how randomly it selects, how there's nothing you can do to prevent it. This awareness makes every subsequent engagement more terrifying. Survivors sometimes felt anger at the dead. Why did you have to die and leave us short-handed? It's irrational, but grief isn't rational. The anger gets mixed with guilt for feeling angry, creating a psychological mess that takes years to untangle. The bond between surviving crew members often intensifies after a death. You're all that's left. You protect each other more fiercely. The loss creates a never-again mentality, though that's not something you can control. Veterans describe the death of crew members as the single most traumatic aspect of tank warfare. Worse than being wounded themselves. Worse than the fear of death. Watching friends die and having to continue fighting alongside their bodies created wounds that never fully healed. Conclusion. So, how's your day been? You've been through it now. Lived a day, maybe weeks, maybe months in a tank during battle. You've experienced the heat that cooked you alive in summer and froze you in winter. The noise that damaged your hearing permanently. The smell that embedded itself in everything you owned. The fear that never left, not even for a second. You've operated a complex machine while exhausted, terrified, and possibly wounded. You've coordinated with crew members you came to know better than family. You've made life or death decisions in fractions of seconds. You've survived or not survived encounters with enemy tanks, anti-tank weapons, artillery, and plain bad luck. You've eaten terrible food, drunk contaminated water, relieved yourself in shell casings. You've gone days without sleep, seeing things that weren't there, making mistakes from exhaustion. You've lived surrounded by fuel and ammunition, always aware that you're inside a potential fireball. You've experienced mechanical failures at the worst possible times. You've fought with limited visibility, basically blind to most of the battlefield. You've dealt with communication breakdowns and coordination failures. You've watched friends die or nearly died yourself or both. And here's the wildest part. This was considered normal. This was the job. Tens of thousands of men did this. They climbed into these metal boxes, day after day, knowing the odds, knowing the conditions, knowing what it would cost them physically and psychologically. And they did it anyway. The men who served in tank crews during World War II faced something most of us can't comprehend. Not because we lack imagination, but because our frames of reference are too different. We live in a world of climate control and modern medicine and instant communication and safety regulations. They lived in a world of iron and fire and noise and death. Many didn't make it out. Their stories ended inside those tanks, in moments of sudden violence or slow burning horror. They deserved better than they got. Better equipment, better support, better understanding of what they were being asked to endure. The ones who survived carried scars, visible and invisible, for the rest of their lives. They came home to a world that couldn't understand where they'd been or what they'd done. They tried to reintegrate, to be normal, to pretend the tank years were just a chapter that ended. For most, it never really ended. So tonight, when you're lying in your comfortable bed, in your climate-controlled room, probably with a screen playing something to help you sleep, maybe say a quiet thank you. Thank you to the guys who spent months in metal coffins so you could have this comfort. Thank you to the crews who breathed diesel fumes and cordite so you could breathe clean air. Thank you to the men who faced death in cramped steel boxes so you could live in safety. And maybe, just maybe, try to remember their stories. Not the sanitized Hollywood versions, but the real ones. The heat and the noise and the smell and the fear. The exhaustion and the trauma and the cost. Because they paid it every day they were in those tanks, and many continued paying it for the rest of their lives. Sleep well tonight. They earned it for you.